Hey, welcome to part 4 of looking at all the nodes in geometry nodes in Blender 3.0. So I hope you're all doing well and let's hop right in. So we will be using Blender 3.0 for this, and we will be looking today at the input nodes and the material node. Let's open Blender 3.0. And we can delete everything and we can input a cube.
That's completely nonsense.
Then we can drag this window up and we can change the window to our geometry nodes editor. Then we can collapse this window because we don't need it, and we can click on new to create a new node tree. I'll drag these a little bit and then we can start. With Shift and A, or here on the top by add, we can add new nodes. We have already covered in the previous parts, you can watch that if you want. We've covered the geometry submenu. Not all were there at the time, like the raycast node, but I maybe cover that later. We've covered in the last part the instances and points submenus. So if you want to know how these work, you can watch them. We've covered the volume, we've covered the mesh, and today we will cover the input nodes and the material nodes. So let's begin. We first want to have a look at the first input node, the Boolean. And this is a very simple node because this node just outputs a value. So if you have unchecked this, it outputs a value of 0. And if you check this, it outputs a value of 1. So this node does exactly what it's saying. It outputs 0 and here a 1. We can check this if we plug our viewer in here. You can create a viewer by holding Control and Shift and then click on the node you want it to be on. Or you can just go here in the output and then input a viewer. So that way it's also working. And where can we see things that the viewer is capturing? We can create a new window and we want to have the spreadsheet. And we can see here everything the viewer sees on our Boolean is listed here on every subtype. So if we would check our Boolean, every vertex stores the value of 1 or just 0. And that's everywhere. So the next thing is the collection info node. And this is a bit more complicated. So the collection info node inputs us. So let me create some more objects like our icospheres here. And we can move those into a new collection called icospheres. And let me drag them in there. And now, so there are two options. We can input our collections into geometry nodes. The first thing is we can go into Shift A in the menu and can grab an input collection info node. And then we can select our icosphere collection here. Or the other thing is we can just take here in the outliner, we can just grab our icospheres with drag and drop and just drag them into geometry nodes. And then this is much faster and this saves us a little bit of time. So this node just inputs the information from our collection or our group. But what are these parameters here now? So let me just take an instance on points node. So we've covered this node in the last part. You can watch that if you want. And I can delete the viewer, we don't need it anymore. And we would take this collection as an instance. So let me just join it back in. So we can see our cube. So we want now to have our icosphere group. Every time an edge is here, we want to have one group. and this doesn't seem quite right. But if we would change something, you can see it's a little bit off. So the original does take the original position, and the relative takes the relative position from our collection. So then with separate children and reset children, we can pick individual icospheres and put them onto our object. And then here, if we would click on pick instance, it picks instances. So you can see here by the object count, it picks individual instances. So you can see a difference because they are stacked on top of each other like this. And this is the collection info node. So the next thing is the color, and we know what this does. It outputs a color. So we can do fancy things with this. Yay. Then we have the integer. And an integer is just a number, but without decimals. So it has no points in it. So you can only have 0, 1, and 2, and so on, but not 2.5 or so. This is 3. So no decimals. This is an integer. Then we have the isViewPort, and this is a very interesting input node because I'll delete this for now. Can use our default cube back here. If we would take in the mesh submenu the subdivision surface, so we've covered the mesh nodes also. You can watch that. It should be part 2 or so. I'm not sure right now. Should be part 2. And we can bump the subdivision surface on. So this node is very, very important if you want to have a lower resolution in the viewport and a higher resolution in when you render the scene. So you have here the levels of subdivision, and this node basically outputs a value of 0 when you are in the viewport, and it outputs a value of 1 in the rendered mode. Not in the rendered mode, when you finally render. And how can we change the subdivision levels in the viewport and in the render? For this, we can take in the utilities the switch node, and we can set it to integer, because we can see here the green dot is always an integer. So we've learned a number without decimals, because you can have only a level of 5 subdivision and not a level of 5.5. That's right. And we can plug that in here. And now this node can plug this into the switch. So now what we've done, if we are in the viewport, if this is true, if we are in the viewport, we have a level of subdivision of 3. You can see it here. But we want to have a level of subdivision 1. And if we are not in the viewport, so this automatically in rendered mode, we have a level of subdivision of 7. So we can test this if we would grab a camera and just position it like that, and we just hit rendered but with low samples. And we can see it has those 7 subdivisions. So this is pretty important for big scenes, because then you have something like preview mode, and this is pretty neat. So the next node is the object info node, and this is basically the same as the collection info node. So we can just drag here. We can use the object info node and then choose our object, or we can just per drag and drop an object out of the outliner into geometry nodes, and then it's basically the same. We can then use the geometry of those objects of this object, sorry, and we can just use it as an instance. And here you can see the difference between original and relative. So the original takes the original position, and the relative uses the relative position from their starting point. So for instances, we want to have an original position. And then we can also, and then we have also the input from our location and rotation and scale. And with this we can make pretty nice things. For instance, we can take a torus. We want to have some points to stick out, so we can see something here like that. It's not beautiful, but only to see the rotation. And with this we can make gears, so like this, and we can use our geometry node tree here, and we can input the info from our other gear into our geometry node tree of the first gear, and we can use an transform node, and we can plug the rotation into the rotation. And now if we would move this, it moves also, but gears are inverted. So let's take a vector math node and just multiply it by -1. And now you can see these are gears. And we can simply make the same thing with that gear. We can just use the transform node and just input this here and use the rotation on the rotation. Just take a vector math node and multiply it by -1 to invert this. And now those are perfectly gears. So it works also in that direction, but this is interesting. But yeah, only to show you this node. And so what is the next node? We have also the string node, and this is just a text. So this just outputs a text. Yeah, this outputs a string, so text. We can then use it here like a string to curve node. There's also a string here, so this just outputs our text as in curve, here string. So these are strings. And then we have a value. You know what that is. It's just a number, not as an integer. It has endless capabilities. Then we have vector input. These are just 3 numbers. So a vector, you know what a vector is. And then the next thing is an ID and an index. So those are pretty similar. So we can view this with a viewer. So an index is just the number that is here. So it counts the elements of our geometry. So this is an index. You can make interesting things with this. So if we would take and delete geometry node, where is it? Here is it. And we would take our index and a math node. We can add something here. And with this, we can let our geometry build itself. So just like that, because every phase has a certain number, and we can grab this number with an index, and then we can use that number to create animations like that. And this is pretty neat. The next thing we have is the normal input node, and this just outputs us the normal of our faces. So we can make effects like can use the set position node. This is also a node we've covered before, and we can use the normal in the offset, so it pushes all faces onto their normal with a value of 1. And we can use another object. I use one icosphere here to take a vector math node to multiply. No, we can take the scale. I've learned this to change the multiply or the strength of this effect. And we can use our icosphere here, pull it with drag and drop in here, and we want to have the distance from our object with the geometry proximity node, and I want to have the distance. And now we have to set it to relative, and now we can see it is working. It's not looking beautiful, but do whatever you want with that. So the next thing is the position input, and it is what it is. It's just the position. So it is just the position of our object. If you want to manipulate the position of your object, just do like that, and then vector math node, and add in here something so you can manipulate your position, but you can also manipulate it here. This value will add it automatically to your position, so it's the same thing as we do here. But yeah, you can do that if you want to. So the last thing is the radius, and this it does exactly what it is called for. It outputs the radius of our curve or our object. So now we have the materials. So for this I can just simply add some materials. So a red material. So I'll simply make it red in the viewport. And then a green material. And I can make it green. And now we have two materials, and we have the material replace material node. And with this node, we can replace a certain material on our object with another material. So our old material was the red material, and our new material is the green material. Just like that. So we have replaced the red material with the green material. Complicated language here. So the next thing is the material index, and this just inputs our material index. You can see it here. We have an index of exactly 0 at the moment, because we are all using the first material, and here it should be 1, right? Right or wrong? Right, wrong. Quite wrong. So the next thing is the material selection, and this just outputs us. So if we have the green material, it outputs us a mask where this green material is, and there is the value 1. And those regions that haven't the green material, they will get a value of 0. So the next thing is the set material node, and with this node you can define your material. This will be the most used one, and this is And you have to use this node if you would, for instance, if you would create something in geometry nodes, so with the mesh primitives, like the cube again, it will not use your materials here because those were inputted with the group input node. So you have to redefine your materials again. So for this, you have to use the set material node to set your new material. So your red cube again, because it was not inputted with the geometry input node, because you don't use it. Then the last thing is the set material index, and this just sets your material index, and this only works here at the moment because the cube doesn't have a material index. So our material index is the number here. So the red is a material index of 0 and the green would be a material index of 1. So it's just the number those materials get. Then if I would make a third material, this will be a material index of 2, and so on and so forth. So now we've covered every node in those two submenus, and I've recently published my first own material pack, procedural material pack. So if you want to have this, you can check out my Gumroad, and this one is for free. So you have 100 plus materials for free, but they're not animated. Those are animated, and here are some more advanced materials like the carbon fiber or something like that. You can watch that out if you want to, and if you have a scene and you don't want to create new materials and just want to drag pre-made materials in, you can take that. It's perfect for you. Or you can check out more on my Gumroad page, more geometry nodes related stuff. And if you want to have more information about my texture pack, I made a video, a tutorial where I showed how to use this texture pack. I link you that on the top right corner. Or you can go on the product page. Here's also something written, but here the tutorial link is better. And if you have recommendations about more material types or another colors or more patterns, let me know. I'm always open for feedback. And yeah, thank you all for watching. I hope you're doing well, and see you later, alligator.